Welcome back to the Spinner Rack here at the Marvel New Universe Comics Podcast. We're your hosts,
Stephen
and Andy, with our special guest, Mike Rockwitz. So for the last few months, we've been looking at New Universe books from Marvel Comics, and at this time, we're recording the issue 10s. But of course, this week, we're not going to talk about any of those comic books. We have a special treat, an interview with someone who worked there at the time. Correct me if I get any of this wrong. So I worked in Marvel editorial maybe 1987 to 95 or so.
You are close. I started there in 1985 as a high school intern in February of 85, and then I worked my way up the editorial ranks. So in 86, I was in college. I came on board and I started working on the New Universe. That was one of my first gigs, was the New Universe titles. And as someone who was super excited to be like, wow, I'm working for Marvel, like the House of Ideas, anyone who's has a pulse and read Marvel, had subscriptions to them. Like it was my dream to always work there. And then I was like an intern getting coffee for the bullpen. And then one day I was opening fan mail. And then that guy, Mike Higgins, he was the original editor. Well, he was the second editor of the New Universe. I'll give you a little bit more of the backstory. He's like, I need an assistant. And we were friends. We were like partying together. I was like, yeah, absolutely. Like, I didn't know what the job entailed. I had no idea. I just thought it'd be cool to get a job, get a gig. And so I was like, so what are we going to be working on? We're going to work on the New Universe. I was like, the new what? It was sort of like the brunt of jokes in the office, because backstory was that Jim Shooter at that point, this is not to demonize or talk smack about him. A lot of creative talent had left Marvel or was planning on leaving Marvel because you might have heard he was a bit overbearing at times, and if you hadn't, let me tell you that a lot of creative talent would say that he was overbearing.
Yeah.
He was heavy-handed in some areas, and a lot of the artists and writers and creative types didn't want that. They were like, we've been doing it right this time, but now you want to tell us to do things in 6-panel grids, and we have to have foregrounds, middle grounds, and backgrounds. Like, and he'd get all annoyed. He's very overbearing, and people didn't like working with him, so they left.
Mm-hmm.
Lo and behold, it's a perfect time to launch a brand new line of comic books to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Marvel Comics. Like, let's open up a whole new line with the world outside your window. And as Jim would say, it's going to be real buildings with real bricks and real pipes and real stories. And it's like, comics are escapism. I think that's why we're trying to get away from the whole real world. But, let's see what they've got going. And there was another editorial team working on it, Elliot Brown and John Morelli. They were the original editor and assistant editor on this. And they had been working on the development of these characters. So there's like a lot of unused logos and maybe unused like character sketches floating around. I think shout out to Josh Deck on the Facebook page, has posted, and Mark as well, like logos for Night Mask.
Yeah, I think some of those showed up in like the Marvel Age magazine. Like,
yeah, you're absolutely right. Starbrand and Starbrand, I think, had 3 or 4 versions of the first cover. And Justice. Don't even get me started with Javistus. And then so working there, like Elliot and Jack just couldn't muster up whatever Jim wanted, because Jim wanted complete control over this. Excuse me, my cat is deciding to hold on, I like to squirt my cat, but anyway, I have 2 cats.
Yeah, we usually have kids bothering us, but
yeah, the cat's trying to open up my closet door here in the office room. So anyway, I digress. They were pulled off the titles, and Mike Higgins, who was like an old time like bullpenner and Grateful Dead head and stoner, was promoted editor, and he needed me. And there was sort of like half-finished books and some plots. So it was really a freaking mess. Yeah. It was just a mess. And the deadline was coming because there was a lot of hype. Like you had that one house ad, the New Universe is coming, and it was like the lightning bolt hitting the planet. And, and
Yep,
And there's even
we've made a version of that for our logo.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that pixelated one I saw. And there was even like a knockoff not brand Eck kind of magazine that spoofed all of these all of these characters like Justice and Night Mask. I don't know if anyone's ever seen it, but it was pretty funny.
Mm-hmm.
And
I've seen a
Jim,
reference to it online, but yeah, I don't
yeah,
know if I could even find
I
it.
forgot the name of it, but it was hysterical because it just like completely blew it up. And you know, I like when you're working on them, you try and take pride in your work. I was a young kid. I was really excited to be there. And I wanted to help these things grow. Like I'm on the ground floor of something great, a new
Yeah,
universe. You know,
right.
I bought into the hype, you know, because I was a kid, you know, I'm dumb. But you know,
Mhm.
reading the stories, I was sort of like, you know, I don't know if there's much substance here. You know, Starbrand was basically Jim's fantasy about himself, and Javistus was just sort of like a poor man's Terminator, and you know, DP7 was kind of cool. Mark was a great writer, and I think most people would say that you know DP7 was the best title out of the lot. I didn't
Yeah.
work on that one with issue one, so I worked on Javistus, Starbrand, Night Mask, and Kickers Inc., which I
Mhm.
adoringly called Kickers Stink, because I was like, how does a football team that has one superpowered guy, you know, like I thought this was the world outside our window, and he gets like sort of irradiated with powers and Jack Magna Conti. It was just like so.
That
And
that one's my secret favorite book.
yeah, and
Like, because
you're
it's got an interesting blend of kind of like wackiness and seriousness, and like I mean, yeah, there's very much like some problems,
it, it
and
just didn't
I get some
fit.
of the history of it, but yeah, there's a lot
It
of fun,
just
weird little tidbits looking back on it.
yeah, it just didn't fit. And Ron and Tom, great combo. I mean, they went on to do Spider-Man and Thor
Yeah,
for like 1,000 issues, and I got to work with them later on that. They just couldn't keep up with the deadlines, or maybe they were too far behind. I didn't ask these probing questions like, how long does it take you to do a book? Because they were already behind. So we
yeah,
were already having what we call fill in issues in the drawer, you know, to bail us out by issue three. It's really hard to gain momentum on a regular title when you're going to have a fill in issue by issues 3 or 4. Like, remember the Witches of whatever it was called, you know, that issue of Kickers. I'm like, whoa, you know, and
yeah. I think one of the funny things about that one was, for us, like we met in chemistry grad school. Like we're both
yeah,
chem PhDs, and like I teach, and he works in a research lab, and it was like that one starred like a chemistry professor who lost his funding, and I'm like, hey, I can relate to that. Like
yeah.
that is a real bummer.
And Night Mask, which I called Nightmare because
Mm.
it was always late. It was like
Oh,
Archie, God rest his soul, one of the nicest, most creative, best people ever to work with. I mean, he was a legend, and I was like a kid, and he called me Schlocko, or the best boy, as you saw. And they nicknamed me Schlocko because I had long hair, and I was a
okay.
kid. I was like a gangly teen, 6'2", skinny, and
Wow.
what's
I've
that?
got the bullpen bulletin from Comet Man #6 where, yeah, it
Mhm.
does say they called you Schlocko.
There you go. Yeah, that was my fun nickname, and I earned it because everything I worked on was pure schlock. And so Night Mask was I called Nightmare because I think we had like 3 or 4 different artists on the first 4 issues or something. We had Ernie Cologne, we had Brett Blevins, Tony Salmons. Like it was just all over the place. Then Archie couldn't get a script in on time. But there
Yeah,
was one issue that was really good of Nightmaster. It was just great that Ernie Cologne and him did. And it was just like so creepy and eerie. And I was like, wow, if only we could have kept them on for like a whole year. I think it really would have done some good for it. And then Javistus, you know, we just laughed when Jim wanted that logo and like the world outside our window. So yeah, that's real buildings, you know, like the way they have the Roman letters engraved in buildings. So the U is a V, but it's not good in the legibility department. And no, this is what I want. So it's like, all right, cool. So we put
yeah,
that on there, and you know, like you could. It was like the Hindenburg, like just a bomb. And that first issue of Javistus was Jim hated it, and it got torn apart over a weekend. Torn
okay.
apart, and it was a Jan job. Like Janet Jackson, shout out to Janet. She was a member of the Mighty Marvel Bullpen, and she and Art Nichols and a few others like redrew like most of that, and Rick Parker lettered it. It's amazing. I remember this stuff, but I can't remember what I ate last week. But and Rick Parker relettered it, and I think Jeff Isherwood did some patches to it because Jeff had originally drawn it with Joe Del Vito, and Jim hated it, completely hated it, and it was a jam job, and that's why it looks as disjointed as it is. And I think was Steve Englehart the writer on that? Yeah, Steve Englehart was on that, and as you could see, Steve didn't last long on the title because he didn't really enjoy working on it. And I think he wanted to work on the Fantastic Four, which he did. And I later worked with him on that. But he was a bit of a, I don't know if he was difficult to work with. He was just a seasoned professional. He knew like he was doing this for the paycheck, and it wasn't worth the grief that he was getting. Like, no, Steve, you have to do it this way. Like Jim was very overbearing on the reviews of all of these titles. And like when you write something, your editor approves it. You don't think that the editor in chief is going to, shred it overnight. And then it comes out to press, and it's kind of demoralizing. But that's the backstory for just the origins of me getting involved with this was just like utter chaos. So what was the outcome of that is I learned a lot in comic book production. I learned, how to rebuild books pretty quickly. I learned about paste up and mechanicals because all of the books were lettered on overlays, like vellum, they called it. We would cut the balloons out and paste them onto the artwork, and I got really good at that. And
and then in the Universe News, when they spend a couple months talking about the sort of behind the scenes people and those paste up and mechanicals, it's like I mean, there's a lot of skills there that we only have heard about. It always sounds very difficult, frankly.
Well, now that in the advent of the computer, if you've ever worked with InDesign or Photoshop and Illustrator, it's very easy to just drag and drop and make balloon shapes and everything and do clipping masks. But then it was like you actually had to have a drawing board, a T-square, an X-Acto blade. You had to have whiteout and this rubber cement, 2-coat rubber cement, and this thing that pulled it off the pages. And you had to be really careful because you're working with original artwork. And you had to be precise, and because if the tail of the balloon had a little bit extra of the vellum on it, you could see where it overlays the artwork. So you had to cut it as close as possible to that. So why they did that was to save time, because traditionally back then you lettered on the actual artwork, and then it went over to the inker. So the inker didn't have to ink all of the artwork. He just inked up to the balloon or around the balloons and the sound effects and whatnot, and the borders were already there. But here was like, okay, here's the pages, you rule the borders, you paste up all the pages, if the inker didn't do it. Well, the inker wasn't responsible for the paste ups, so the inker had to make sure that the borders were there. So I learned that, and then I also learned coloring too, because Jim would say, like, we have to fix this coloring on this. And ideally, the books had to go out like a month before shipping being shipped to the comic book distributors, whether it's a retail store or the candy store, the newsstand back then.
Right.
And we were getting the books out at 2 weeks beforehand, maybe a week and a half. And back then, there wasn't Photoshop where you could just like give them digital files and they could print from digital files. No, they had to go to we call them the chemical ladies, where we'd give them the hand-colored guides, and they would go in and mask out the 4 screens, the black, the cyan, magenta, and yellow, with the shades of the tones in the color guides. And that was a tedious process.
Yeah, no doubt.
And to do that in a week is insane. And we kept doing that. And we couldn't seem to get ahead, because once you're late, you're always late, and you want to maintain the continuity. So at Star Brand, we had John Romita Jr. Wow. And Al Williamson. What gorgeous artwork. It was just gorgeous. But the stories were like, ooh, duck, and, the old man. And it just never seemed to go anywhere. And then they just kind of went off into these like single issue stories that didn't make a lot of sense. And then Jim was on his way out, because behind the scenes there was kind of like this Marvel mutiny of the editors. The editors had enough of his nitpicking and micromanaging, and they all stormed into his office one day. And I didn't. I almost wanted to go in, but I was like, I still want to have a paycheck, I
Right.
I kind of like working here. I don't have as much history, good or bad, with him. And they basically blew up his spot, so to speak, and you're a tyrant and all this. I wasn't in the room, so I can't say that I know verbatim what happened. But he was on his way out. He had lost the trust of his team, and so he was always late. And what can you say to your boss? You're late, we're going to fire you, when he has the power to fire you. So you just had to wait until he would come in and say, here's some script, send it over to John. You'd have to send it over to John via FedEx, and John would come in, and it was just stressful.
Yeah.
But the great part was you got to see it printed, and all that effort that you went through behind the scenes, because no one knows a lot about the behind the scenes until you actually work on it. And then you're like, oh, wow, here's the actual copy of it. And I was like, this is really cool. And then I think that Night Mask 9 that Archie put me in as the best boy, the Keith Giffen one. I think that was the first time my name actually made the credits, aside from maybe a letters page. And I was like, wow.
I noticed it.
I was like, wow, I made it, and it's very gratifying. Like, I think I made my name in the letter column somewhere. I think on the Silver Surfer, because Higgins and I worked on the New Universe titles as well as the Silver Surfer. And this is not a Silver Surfer thing, but at the same time, like, wow, we get to work on the Silver Surfer, the real Marvel Universe. Then we have the New Universe, and the Silver Surfer, we had Englehart writing that too. So he was more jazzed about that instead of doing this like Javista stuff. So, and that was fun. And it gave me a taste of what, the legitimate Marvel Universe had. So knowing what was going on while you're making them was cool, but then also getting the books out was great. And then there was a lot of momentum. But even the guy I was working with, Higgins, he had a serious, he had some dependency issues, let's just say that, substance abuse issues, which hopefully I pray to God he got resolved, over the years. But he was very erratic.
He was an older guy than you, though?
Yeah, I was 19 or 18. He was maybe 30. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I
thought he was a young guy too for some reason.
Well, no.
It's all relative.
30's pretty young to me now. So anyway, he helped me get into Marvel, my internship. So I had this sort of loyalty to him because the program I used was called City of School to get in there, but it only did public schools. And I was in an all boys Catholic high school in Manhattan, New York, that he was in, and he was a graduate from it. So there was some sort of loyalty there or whatever. Oh, he's a member of the club. Let's get him in. So he put in a good word for me. So I felt very grateful. Like, wow, you helped get me in. But then once I started working with him, he was just really erratic. He was just kind of like, wow, he was just never there. And he would call me up. Oh, my cat is now deciding to hit a ball here. Come on, out. I have another cat that's sleeping. I have a younger one here. So, excuse me. Hopefully you can edit that out or not. But
if I can find it again, I always can.
Yeah, that's fine. It might amuse.
He always promises to edit stuff out.
It might amuse.
I leave in all of Steven's mistakes and fix all of mine.
Awesome. Leave it in for outtakes for the future. So he was very erratic, and that's not to disparage him. He just wasn't there. He'd call me up at around 11:30, like, I'm not coming in. And I'm like, okay, what am I supposed to do? Like, you kind of want your boss to be there when you're a team to edit these things. And, it doesn't go unnoticed.
Especially if you're kind of brand new to the industry and such. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't go unnoticed. And Shooter was fired April 15th, 1987. I know that because Ralph Macchio had a t-shirt made of it. Ralph Macchio, I think, was one of the editors. I worked with Ralph later on, but he was one of the editors of, I think he worked on one of the New Universe titles, or he worked on it later. And Mike quit like a month after that. So no voice of the New Universe, editor-in-chief, is gone. Then the guy who was editing half of the titles was gone, my boss. So I'm like, what do I do now? And then I think they moved the books over to Howard Mackey at that point, or maybe Terry Cavanaugh, or Howard Mackey.
Mackey was taking over Star Brand, because I remember he was the
with John Byrne.
John Byrne,
right? He put John Byrne on, and
when it was early on, and it was still all chaotic. Like, did you have kind of like new universe ground rules to kind of go by? Or was it more like you try and follow what you're doing, and then by the time it made to editor in chief, you'd get sort of surprised, like, no, we have to do it this way, kind of stuff? Or
that's a great question. In the realm of sanity, you would think that
you think you'd have like a guidebook or something.
You'd have plot conferences. Like this is the timeline. This is like what we're planning to do with the character. What do you think? Let's brainstorm. And so it wouldn't be like a shock when he's reading the issue, like, oh, what the hell is this? So no, we didn't have a plan. Let's just say we pulled it out from we were going by the seat of our pants. An interesting story. I still can remember, this is one of my favorite interactions with Jim and the New Universe and Star Brand number 2. I know you're up to issue 10 or 11 now, so forgive me. I'm going back. You may have noticed this, that in Star Brand 2, there's a scene with a reporter, Ray Tannehill, of some local Pittsburgh, and you're from Pittsburgh, so you're nodding your head.
Yeah, I looked him up. Yeah, some
Ray Tannehill.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah,
the Ray Tannehill issue.
You talked about that one, I think.
So Ray Tannehill is the broadcaster of the world outside our window. So he's making a reference to Ray Tannehill. Jim had sworn up and down that he gave me reference for Ray Tannehill, a photo of Ray Tannehill, to give to John Romita Jr. I had no recollection of it. We had the unbound copy, was called a make ready. It was like a sort of like cut up issue that the printer would send to us. It's like, okay, here's a go by. This is what's going to go look like. The main office was on the 10th floor, and Mike, myself, Bob Harris, and Bobby Chase shared an office on the 11th floor, which is a lot of legal offices. And Jim comes up the stairs. Jim was like 6'7", 6'8". He leans in and goes, Schlocko. And I was like, oh boy. It was after, I think it was like 5 o'clock. And when, Jim looked pissed, he looked really pissed off. And he's holding the book in this little comic book in his big hands. And I'm like, okay, I'm 6'2". I'm not a shrimp boat by any stretch of the imagination, but he's like 6'8". He's an intimidating character, and he's older and he's established. And he goes, well, what the fuck happened? Oh, can I curse? I'm sorry. You can bleep it out.
It's fine.
He's like, what happened? And I'm like, well, what do you mean, Jim? What happened with Ray Tannehill? I'm like, I didn't want to sound ignorant, but we did get it out in like 2 nights or something. Can't say I have every page memorized. I was like, Ray Tannehill was like, yeah, look at this. Look at this. What the hell happened? I'm like, I gave you a photo. This is not Ray Tannehill. You fucked up, Schlock. You fucked up. And he was like yelling at me. And I'm like, I'm sorry, Jim. It was just so chaotic. I was like traumatized. I'm like, am I going to be fired over Ray freaking Tannehill? And he went into an empty office next door to ours. And it was so melodramatic. The light was dim. And he was holding his head in his hands like, oh. So I was like, that's the Ray Tannehill one. And then there was an episode of just Javistas, where we had the book lettered overnight. And
wow.
There was a typo. Like Rick Parker could letter like 100 pages a night. Rick I've lost touch with, but he was an amazing letterer. I think he moved up to Maine. Incredible person, super creative. He lettered the book overnight, and there was a misspelling of the word breach.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay. He goes, breach. Do you know how to spell Schlocko? Like I was the company proofreader. And I was like, he was yelling at me over breach. We can't have this. It's unprofessional. So I could see why other people might get this feeling that their toes were getting stepped on, because just 2 minor gaffes, in the grand scheme of things, with no forgiving of the stress that we were under to just sort of get these things out so we could save face. Let's be realistic here. You've already solicited this. We had the catalogs going out saying this is when it's supposed to come out. And it looks kind of embarrassing when the boxes come in and then there's no issues of DP7, or DP7 was never late, by the way. No issues of Night Mask there. No issues of Javistas, or no Star Brands, no Kickers, no Merc, and no Spitfire and the Troubleshooters.
So I'd read somewhere like they paid ahead of time for these print runs, and you basically have to get the the material to the printer on time, or you're losing money if they
Yeah,
can't
well,
print
you're
it when
losing
they
money.
tell them?
You're losing on sale time too. And if in those days, if you missed a shipping date, those books could be called returnable.
Oh, okay.
So a comic book shop that was expecting them to have them there for 3 weeks to sell them, you only have 2 weeks. Well, screw this. I've lost money. I've already paid out of pocket, so it can become returnable.
Oh.
So it was in everyone's best interest to bust your ass, pay a little bit more to work overtime to get it there, because you wanted to not make a miss shipping, because it's also your reputation at stake too.
Yeah.
Because DC was trying to remain on time, and this is their way of needling us. Like, they can't get their books out on time. Ours are on the rack.
Mm-hmm.
So
I feel like over the course of Marvel versus DC, that like goes back and forth all the time. So I remember reading comics,
especially since the balance of power, dare I say, was leaning in their favor. Because John Byrne left. John Byrne was super.
You're
productive.
just a year after Crisis, or Crisis is wrapped up, and so they must have been really seeing a lot of increased attention at that point. And over at Marvel, you're feeling we got to up our game even more now.
Yeah, so we're going to create a whole line of comics that no one's ever heard of. Yeah, that was the grand scheme thing. John Byrne went to Superman. He's going to do a bunch of Superman titles. That's their flagship character. Big blow. Right. Guy used to draw the X-Men. Decides like even Walt Simonson, he was having a hard time with Jim. The Simonsons. Simonson's a great guy. And he has a lot of patience and great disposition. But even that's like, I don't need this.
I think they were just anything bad about Simonson. I mean, Byrne and Shooter, certainly people have opinions on, like they've strong personalities clashing. I can only
there was the burning in effigy party we had after Jim was fired. I don't know if you've ever heard about that.
I've seen the story a bunch of times.
John Byrne hosted it at his house. I don't know who came up with the concept, but I remember having boxes of New Universe comic books that no one wanted in my apartment that we were going, and I bought the suit that we were going to burn Jim. And I was 19 at the time. As a 55-year-old man now, I certainly would, if I go back in time, I probably would not do this. My current self would go back and say, Mike, young Mike, don't do this. Bad idea. Very bad. This is not something to be proud of. So I'm not proud of this. This just is actually what happened. I bought the suit at a thrift store. It was an old gray suit or a black suit. We made a cutout of his head on a Xerox machine, put it on a piece of cardboard, put it on the top of the suit that was stuffed with the New Universe comic books. And John had a party in his house up in Greenwich, stately Byrne Manor, we used to call it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was hammered at the time. I was bombed out of my mind. And apparently I lit the thing too quickly. There's video of this somewhere floating around. So we burned him in effigy. Byrne was singing. A few others were singing. They were adults. I'm going to say that. So all of those, like they knew better. I clearly did not know better, but they went along with it. So John, if you're listening, how dare you? Shame on you. But he wound up throwing me out of that party because I became an unruly mess. And I was banned from working. I'm going to his house ever again. But I did work with him again. And when I was promoted to full-time editor, it was like a joke between us. I would call him up and offer him a book. Like I was working on Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Doctor Strange. So I was like, hey, John, you want to work on this? He'd be like, no. And then he heard I got another book and he called me up to tell me I'm not working on that book for you. So it was like we patched things up from my point of view, but he might think differently. But yeah, so they didn't get along. So everyone was dancing on Jim's grave at the conclusion of him being terminated, burning him in effigy, turning Starbrand into I don't know what, and then blowing up Pittsburgh. Let's be realistic here. There was some petty things going on, and at that point, that was by issue 12. I think Byrne came on issue 10 or 11 of Starbrand, if memory serves me right. Do you guys remember?
Yeah, 11. I'm gonna say
around then.
Yeah, 11. Yeah, because I think Roy Thomas wrote a few issues.
So it's bi-monthly after Byrne leaves, and then I couldn't tell. Like, was it that the editors didn't just didn't know what to do with it, or like why you went?
Well, I think they knew they had to put it out of its misery because most of the other titles were done after a year. Like well, except for Justice and DP7, like Night Mask, Kickers,
and don't forget Cyforce. That
well,
one lasted too.
Yeah, Cyforce lasted, but Justice, Kickers. What else?
Yeah, Nightmare
and
Spitfire, Kicker,
Spitfire,
yeah, Spitfire and the Troubleshooters. Yeah, there were ones that were just, and Merc. Yeah, I said Merc. They were just on their last legs. And at one point, I did work on all of them because I went on to become Howard Mackey's assistant, and they consolidated the remaining titles that were remaining with him, and I was his assistant for a few months before I went over to work with Terry Cavanaugh on Marvel Comics Presents and other things.
Okay.
Because that was something that Higgins had started as well while we were working on the New Universe, the little eight-page mini series. I worked on that for a bunch of stories, and that was a lot of fun because I got to work with a ton of creative talent who just like could make up their own stories. It's an 8-page story. Do whatever you want with the characters.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I saw that Higgins had gone over to Marvel Comics Presents, and I was like,
yeah,
I wonder if it was like working on a weekly or bi-weekly to try to get the new universe out when you're just pushing against deadlines all the time. Like, was it a similar experience?
No, because working on a weekly, I think Marvel Comics Presents was bi-weekly at the time. That was the concept. We had to have a lot of content in the drawer, as we used to call it. We used to have a lot of like backlog of content, so you knew how to plan it out. That, to answer your question, Andy, about was there a plan with Marvel Comics Presents? There definitely was a plan. Like we're going to have a eight-part Wolverine, a 6-part Shang-Chi, or 8-part Shang-Chi, and when you work to the New Universe, it's like, oh God, we have another issue to do. Like is there a cliffhanger here? Like, oh gosh, like we're late already. It's not like we had, and then, but in all fairness, when Jeff Isherwood came on, and hi Jeff, if you ever tune in, Jeff was a tremendous artist. He started writing Justice and Javistas.
Yeah.
Like he just decided,
we
I'm going to write it.
As like, hey, wow, okay.
He started writing and drawing it, and the reason he got that is because it's like, oh, thank goodness someone wants to actually write this, and draw it. It's like, oh, bonus. And he was reliable and professional, and he was good. Like his writing he was a new writer, but it's like, who cares? Could he do any worse than what was already put out? Like some of those Englehart issues were just like a mess that like some plot threads never resolved. And I didn't read the Peter David stuff because I was already off of it. And, at that point, like I kind of detached. No slight to the New Universe fans out there. I kind of detached after like 12 to 14 issues of this stuff, or 15 issues. You're sort of like, oh my gosh, I've had enough. Like, I really don't care. And like DP7 though, I really enjoyed those characters. And Mark Grunwald, I went on to become his editor on Captain America and Quasar. So and Mark was a great guy, taken way too soon.
Yeah.
And Paul Ryan and Danny Bulanati, they were a consistent creative team, and they were great. Like Paul Ryan was awesome. I don't think he ever got the respect he's so rightfully deserved, because he was a great illustrator, compositor, storyteller, reliable, dependable. You could set your watch to him. Like, this is when the work's going to come in, and it's going to be good and professional.
Yeah, right. Like fast, and it doesn't look rushed. Like great details.
Just like he'd have 3-point perspective. He'd have all the grid lines. I was like blown away by his professionalism. No shortcuts. Like every page is rich and lush. Details, backgrounds. And Danny Bulanati, he just passed away too. It's like, oh gosh, everyone's like dropping like flies. Rest in peace, Danny. He would capture all of it, and he didn't overwhelm it like a lot of the Filipino inkers would. It was such a great team. And you had Paul Beckton, who worked in the bullpen. He was the colorist. I think he did all of the issues, or most of the issues. And Paul's health is bad now too. I think he's in a nursing home now. So I hope he's getting better. But yeah, and Paul was working on that. I'm kind of morose here. Anyway, but it was such a consistent team quality on such weird characters that no one really cared about, which is so disappointing. They care about them now, I think, and those who did buy it did care about them, but there wasn't a lot of sales. Yeah. So when the books, ended, where were they going to fit in? Like at that point in Marvel X books, everything was Wolverine or Ghost Rider or Spider-Man. Like McFarlane had gone on to Spider-Man. You had Ghost Rider. You had the X-Men with Jim Lee coming on. So there was sort of like, there was no space because Marvel said, okay, we now have people wanting to work with us. It was like a very boom before they went over to Image, of course. There's a big boom there. Everyone wanted to work with them. So you couldn't find space for like, oh, let's work DP7 into the X-Men universe. Oh, go away. What a terrible idea. We'll work it into the Avengers or something. They may have done that in the current iterations of them. I don't even read them anymore.
I think they ended up like somehow wrapping into like Quasar, but I haven't read any of it. Like,
well, I edited Quasar and I edited them, I think issue 40 through 50 something Quasar. That was fun. But it was it wasn't a consistent application of the characters. Right. And I don't think anyone else but Mark knew what they were. Like if you could get into Mark Gruenwald's brain, he knew all the characters better than anyone. And just to hand the keys over to someone else and say, you drive them, I think it would have been a disservice to the characters. And I'm sounding so pompous here saying that, but they're just like dopey comic book characters. But he really knew them and he loved them, and he put such energy into them that to give them to someone else and be like, all right, what are you doing with DP7? Do we really need a DP7 like tie-in? It's not like, wow, this is a must-have.
Yeah, my guess was always kind of like, it's just a tough sell for non-superhero characters, right? Like it was well written and it's well drawn and the characters are interesting if you sit down and read it. But like to just look at it on the shelves and pick it up or like hear what it's about, it doesn't sound too flashy for like people who are, which planet is Silver Surfer visiting kind of thing.
Yeah, versus paranormals, displaced paranormals. What? Right.
It doesn't make
as opposed to mutants, X-Men.
Yeah. I think that Ryan's style was perfect for a more realistic line. And so if all of the titles could have kind of kept up with that would have really maybe caught on. I don't know. Like you say, without being flashy and having costumes and everything, it's like why is this a comic book instead of something else?
Yeah, you're right. And
I've given my friends a lot of copies of DP7 #1, so we'll see if it catches on again sometime.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, their back issues are pretty cheap, so for the fans of them, go out and get them.
Yeah.
Why not? And read them and then write your own blogs about them or do your own podcasts about them because they exist. And it's a shame that, they didn't catch on more than they did. But, it's being at the right place at the right time. They were definitely in the wrong place at the wrong time.
So one of the things I kind of noticed, and it seems like it probably overlaps with your tenure there, is, maybe the first 6 to 8 issues, there was a lot of changes, and then things started to kind of settle down. Maybe right around the time Shooter left too, and we started to get more regular creative teams on books, even as they were kind of heading towards cancellation, perhaps. Was that kind of a concerted effort to kind of get things back on track at some point?
Well, yeah, I think it coincided with Jim's departure, Mike Higgins' departure, and the fact that comic books, everyone wants to work for Marvel Comics and maybe DC too, but anyone you talk to on the streets today would like, I'd love to draw comics for Marvel Comics. Can I show you my drawing? Yeah. I have an idea. So that was the case back then where people just said, I want to work on these. There was an opportunity for people to just cut their eye teeth in comic books. Like you held up an issue of Nightmask during our break with Mark Bagley. Yeah, Mark Bagley and Tony DeZuniga. Mark Bagley was a Marvel Trial Contest winner. Marvel Trial Contest. It was a giant book that people were instructed on how to pencil, ink, letter, and even color comic book pages, and they gave you Marvel Bristol board on the back with a plot, and everyone would have to draw their plot, and there were stacks of submissions. Somehow Mark Bagley made it through the stacks of submissions, and was crowned the Marvel Comics tryout winner. And what do you do with that? You give him an issue of the New Universe.
Thankfully for us readers, because it ends up looking nice, right?
I take no credit for that. Higgins we need an artist. Let's get Mark Bagley on. And Mark was like, sure, I'll do it. He was super cool, super nice guy. And his layouts came in, they were really good. I think our first issue with him we gave to Ernie Chan or something. Ernie Chan, rest in peace too. Was a great artist, worked on Conan mostly, but Ernie, it was basically through telephone. Yeah. We didn't have instant message, we didn't have text messages, we didn't have computers. People would call the office, Mike from Marvel. Hey, Mike, this is Ernie Chan. You have any work? Yeah, I have this issue of Night Mask. Okay. 3 weeks later, it's all done. So it was just people who got through, knew there was a need. And when the dust settled, I think having less chaos at the top let other things grow. When you cut off the rotting head, it kind of helps the rest of the fish. It keeps it from rotting. So I definitely think that's a terrible analogy, but anyway, it helped, and I think people hungry to get into the business, they saw it as a stepping stone. I think Javier Saltares worked on some of those, and he went on to work on Ghost Rider. Cyforce had a bunch of people like Rodney Ramos and Chris Ivey, and multiple artists. Mike Baer, Mike Hernandez, he did those funky covers for Night Mask. And I think he did one issue of Night Mask or a couple of pages. Sandy Plunkett, wow, he would do some beautiful covers. Right, yeah. Beautiful covers. I think he did one for Givistus too. Dave Hoover, Lee Weeks, all these people who were looking for work. And then, Lee Weeks went on to draw everything and did Daredevil really beautifully. So yeah, you're right. That's a great observation. I think once we got past those really bumpy first 6 months, things kind of calmed down, because for obvious reasons, but also because things kind of settled. Yeah. And Jeff took over Justice. Night Mask, we sort of had Mark Bagley on it and Roy Thomas writing it. Justice, yeah, like I said, Starbrand, John took over. Spitfire was still all over the place. I think he had Alan Kupperberg working on it with Tony DeZuniga, and Carrie Bates was writing some. I think Terry Kavanaugh and Ron Altaville were working on Kickers Inc.
Yep.
And
I like that run.
Yeah.
Which I think it was 2 or 3 issues, but it feels like a run.
Well, that was probably the longest run of any of the creative teams aside from Tom and Ron.
I think it might have been.
Yeah, and Terry and Ron. I knew Terry because I worked with Terry, and so he took over the book. And we worked with guys like Howard Bender, anyone who could just get the jobs done. But those books were on their last legs. And then, of course, you had Danny and Paul and Mark. And so, yeah, it was definitely a feeding ground for people to get into other books once those were canceled, because they proved themselves. It was sort of like paying your dues. If you worked on the New Universe, you paid your dues. It wasn't like, I'm going to wait for an issue of Spider-Man, because the likelihood of you getting on Spider-Man right away was just not going to happen, because it's only 1 or 2 titles.
Right.
Everyone wants to draw Spider-Man and write Spider-Man, so there wasn't a lot of openings.
Yeah, I could kind of imagine it would work as new talent showcase, where you have sort of a lower bar for, why don't you pitch us a story? Why don't you try this fill-in issue? And, you're not a big risk there. So
no, there was no risk, because we knew these things were getting canceled anyway. So it's sort of let's do it. You're hired. And similar, I took that approach when I was editor of some titles that were being canceled anyway. Like when I took over Power Pack,
All right.
I was like, Power Pack? Ugh. I was not a fan of Power Pack. Not to disparage Power Pack fans, because there are legion of them. Mike Higgins was the writer. When I inherited the title, I didn't have the heart to fire him. Mm-hmm. And we knew it was canceled. And he's like, I'm going to turn one of the kids into a horse. I was like, what? We did it. We did it. And I had Tom Morgan draw it. I had my old roommate, Steve Bucelato, draw one of them. But anyway, so yeah, definitely new talent showcase. Definitely a feeder for and if only we had the brains to label it as such, the New Universe Talent Showcase might have might have garnered more sales and more attention. Like, oh, here's some up and comers. But there was a lot of good there that I think gets overlooked just because of the history and the stigma associated with it.
Yeah, that's what I've kind of noticed. It's like, all it takes is like two people writing articles online about, how everything is kind of bad, and clearly it was sort of a failure in that a lot got canceled and it didn't really catch on. But and then somebody reads that web article and publishes pretty much the same thing without reading all of the comic books, So
yeah,
like I feel like most of the people who are kind of talking about how everything in it is terrible, like didn't read most or any of it as well. It just kind of like cycles in internet news stories. But yeah,
like the later run of Justice, which I did read when I got them all in my back issues, was really good. It was good. Peter David writing, that was like when he was really, like I said, cutting his eye teeth writing there. I mean, what did he go on to write? Do the Incredible Hulk with Todd McFarlane? Boom. And he was working like sales and marketing at Marvel. I used to bring him covers to sign off on because he worked like in the sales and marketing department. Then he went on to become a writer, a really good writer.
Yeah. So I was a big fan. Like he did the first 4 issues of Mark Hazard Merc, which had a really fun angle where, it was like half actiony Rambo kind of stuff, but then other half like dealing with his ex-wife's new husband and his kid and stuff. And like, it was just kind of fun.
Yeah, it was definitely different. Mark Hazard Merc kind of went off the rails there because they couldn't seem to find consistent artwork. But they had some cool covers.
Yeah.
Wow. Zek covers. And then I think some of the interiors like Gray Morrow. Really nice.
There's a lot of Gray Morrow on that one.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful art. Like, wow. If you hate the title, just buy it for the artwork. Beautiful. You're not going to see that on a regular book.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if we went through and looked at all the new books that came out in those years, like how many of them were, like what the risk of cancellation within a year is, but it didn't seem like these were significantly, let's just say there were things coming out at the same time, like Alpha Flight, that I don't think anyone really cared about one way or the other, but they just kind of kept going from momentum or something.
Yeah, I used to call them Awful Flight. Yeah, I just never got it. And Cloak and Dagger, like, oh God, and Strange Tales and Doctor Strange, like. And they some of them did get canceled, like Doctor Strange. I don't know. When I took it over, it was like on volume 3 or 4, and even Shield. Like it's like, oh God, why are we doing this? It's like Mission Impossible, Drek. It just isn't working. It's not translatable. Like when Steranko did it in the 60s, like James Bond, really cool Mission Impossible stuff. Kids aren't interested. They want to see guys with bones coming out of their hands and carving people up like a Christmas goose or something, angry and rage. And kind of like when the grunge era of music came, that's when like the Marvel, everyone shifted their styles and everyone started getting like gigantic muscles and, the McFarlanes and the Liefelds and everyone took over. So
Superman got the long wavy hair and
everyone had mullets and, it was kind of cool.
Style definitely did not go in a more realistic direction.
No, there was no realism in the new universe, with the exception of maybe the Paul Ryan book, Zero. Even the Ray Tannehill incident, like we couldn't even get that right. It still looked like a comic book. Look, it's really hard to make something look realistic and have you escape into it when it's drawn. Even today with the advent of Photoshop and using photo reference or the latest topic, AI technology to render things, you're still looking at something that was manufactured for you, not something that you can experience yourself and you're actually investing in it. So it's like, who are we kidding? Yeah. So I think that's, and I think that just the knock on it was that it was Jim's idea. If you said it was Stan's idea, would we be hearing this much flack about it? I really don't think so. Like if you, because Stan is idolized, like he can do no wrong. I mean, people would fall on a hand grenade for Stan. Like, go to any one of these fan pages where there's the arguments between Stan and Jack, like, who did what? Chicken or the egg? Like, did Stan do it? No, Jack did it. No, Stan did it. No, and it's almost like the cult of personality there. Like, if Stan Lee said, "This is my new universe," I would be, oh, kind of cool, Stan. Like, don't talk bad about it,
Yeah, I would stand behind all the concepts too, of like the characters and stuff. Like Night Mask is, at its time still kind of an original concept of kind of like,
it was
we're
cool
exploring all these dream worlds, right? And Justice with the kind of like fish out of water story, um, alien kind of on Earth, right? Like there's a lot of cool story potential there, kind of thing. Yeah. So just all the concepts to me work.
I mean,
You said
they also helps that they're sort of isolated, because if you threw some of those concepts into the main Marvel universe, they just sort of get lost in the, overshadowed by all the existing teams and everything. So it makes sense to try a new thing and sort of partition it off, let it sort of grow on its own.
Yeah, I mean, the traditional Marvel characters were already established. You're going to put Justice against the Punisher? Like, no, I don't think so. You're like, what's his angle? He's an alien? Okay, cool. The Punisher is just way cooler, has a better costume, has an edge. He's a murderer. He will just blow you away. And, and Bullseye, like a maniacal character with Daredevil. Like what did you have in the universe? You didn't have a lot of antagonists there. Like,
no, you didn't.
It was just sort of like everything just sort of happened. Like, what was the antagonist in Starbrand? Can anyone tell me?
You have the old man, right?
Yeah, okay.
And everything kind of drifts from there. But
so you had a Grizzly Adams character that was sort of mysterious in the background.
In my head, because in rereading Starbrand, and that's one of the few New Universe books that before we started doing this, I had read myself. I think twice through actually. Mm-hmm. Like in reading it, I'm kind of like, is this just a romance book that has some action scenes to kind of break it up? Because like there's just a lot of like him and his girlfriend and his side girlfriend and these kind of things, which are kind of funny and interesting romance stories, and then occasionally something gets blown up or the old man shows up.
Yeah, the terrorists are coming and we have to detonate the bomb. I think that was an issue too. That was a fun one too, where we couldn't get a cover done, and then John Romita Sr. had to draw it like in a day. Where he's holding that bomb upside down, like the atomic bomb, and he's underwater and everything. I was like, oh yeah, that's the world.
You got it.
Exactly. Yeah, there it is. John did that like in an overnight. World outside your window. Like, okay. And it's like
you said Justice was your favorite though?
Well, in the long run, yeah, because Justice was just I was a fan of like the Terminator and stuff, so let's not lie. And then you had a guy with a Highlander, and you sort of had a guy with a mullet and weird shades and a trench coat. The trench coats were big back then with the bad guys. And
this is true.
And I like the art. I think I like Jeff's art. I like Steve's storytelling. And I have to say, from a personal point of view, Vinnie Coletta was the inker on a lot of these. And Vinnie is so disparaged. Like, he is vilified. He's excoriated, like pitchforks and everything coming out for Vinnie because of the way he inked Jack Kirby or something. But
right.
It's just like they call him a hack. I mean, if you ever heard of the Thin Black Line by Tomorrow's Publishing, it's a whole book about Vinnie Coletta and how people hate him. And I actually was interviewed for that. And I'm like, Vinnie was cool. He was an older guy. He looked like a gangster. He would come up, he would deliver the Justice pages. And they look like Jeff Isher. They look like Vinnie Coletta did it. He had like someone do the backgrounds for him. He's like, these pages, they stink. And I'm like, okay. He didn't say it about Jeff. There was an issue with Tony Salmons. Tony Salmons, great draftsman. He had sort of like this weird Kirby Mignola feel to him. And Tony brought the pages in. I think it was for issue 3 or 4 of Justice. And they're really cool. They almost had like a Gene Colan, like grayish tone to the pencils of them, which was really hard to capture in black and white. So, of course, giving it to Vinnie because Jim was in love with Vinnie. Give this to Vinnie. It's like, I don't know what Vinnie had on Jim, but everything was going to Vinnie. So it was always
he does show up a lot in the New Universe books.
Yeah, it was that intrigue because Vinnie was the only one who could do all the work. Give it to Vinnie. No one else wanted to work on it. I was like, this is a career killer. I don't want to work on it when Jim's on this. So Vinnie would bring in the pages, and when he saw Tony's pages, he came and he's like, kid, these pages, they stink. I'm like, why do you say that, Vinnie? I'm going to get someone to help me out repencil them. I'm going to get Frankie G on him. Like, Frankie G. Giacoya. I'm going to get Giacoya on him. Like, okay, Frank Giacoia, like, wow, Frank Giacoia is going to help ink backgrounds of justice. What happened to Frank? Well, Frank was, on the tail end of his career. He was an older guy. So Justice Pages came back in, and Tony Salmons, who was pretty new in the business, maybe a couple of years, came in, and he almost cried when he saw it. He was like, oh my God. Like when he took out the pages from the drawers. I'm like, yeah, Vinny did the job, and he ruined the and I felt so bad, but it's like, dude, we got to get this stuff out. You're getting paid no matter what. I wasn't unsympathetic to him per se, but at the same time, I was like,
it's just nothing you can do about it. Yeah.
Being the diva right now, dude. No one else is hiring you, so get in line. So, I mean, the long story about Vinny was that working with Vinny was a blast. I had so much fun working with him. And when Jim was fired, there came the Vinny Coletta letter. If you've ever heard of that, Google Vinny Coletta letter to Marvel, where he basically rips apart all of Marvel editorial, the business guys, and says, you're laughing like ghouls, tearing at his flesh. He was the only honest guy, and that basically put a exclamation point at the end of Vinny's career. Which was a shame, because Vinny was like in his 60s. He worked on Jack Kirby, for crying out loud. He did all the romance, and was a DC art director. He wasn't a bad guy. People just didn't like his style.
Right.
And when you're working on books that no one really likes anyway, why are you getting up in arms about this? And I don't think people were looking at the comic book stand and saying, I'm not going to buy that book because Vinny Coletta is inking it. There might have been a handful, but I think the majority of them didn't buy the books because they just didn't know who the characters were. They weren't promoted. It wasn't like you could do email blasts and say, like, hey, this issue of Justice. You couldn't do a podcast. You couldn't do any of the things that now can really hype them. You didn't have a Facebook page. You didn't have Instagram. You didn't have TikToks. You had nothing. It was a little blurb this big in a comic book catalog with 1,000 other titles. What made you stand out amongst that? Pretty tough sell, if you ask me.
So that brings up a couple of questions I guess I had.
Sure.
One is, as far as self-promotion, there's not a lot of the Universe News doesn't show up a lot in the first few months, and there's not a lot of letters pages.
Right.
Were those just too late for the editorial for each book to get out, or was there?
Well, to answer the first one, Universe News, some of the stories ran long. We actually had to pull ads from the books to get it's typically 22 pages of content. I think some of Jim's were maybe 23 or 24. And sometimes we had to pull ads or pull the letters page. And sometimes we would just run an ad where the letters page was. And the reason why there wasn't a letters page for the first 3 or 4 issues was there was no fan mail. No one writing any letters because it was all brand new. It wasn't like a new editorial regime of Spider-Man where it's like, hey, this new issue stinks because I've been a fan for 25 years. So you had to wait for it to come in. So little tale here for you is that probably 90% of those letters in the first few letter columns were made up.
That does kind of add up, because there's a lot of them in some of those early ones who are like, oh wow, I just bought this and it's the greatest issue ever, and this character is like the coolest thing ever, and they're really kind of generic.
Yeah. And people would get paid $25 to type them up and type the responses, and we would get a typeset, and my job was, or the bullpen's job was, to cut them out and put them on a board and send them out. So yeah, that's the reason there was no letter columns. And the New Universe bulletins, or what was it called again? New Universe what?
Universe News.
Yeah, Universe News. I think Mark Grunwald wanted us to do that because we didn't have an identity, and we're basically trying to hype ourselves amongst ourselves.
Right.
It's kind of like the old adage, clapping with one hand,
Yeah.
Round of applause, please. We're doing a great job by not delivering you books on time, by not giving you consistent themes. It's sort of, it's kind of it's a hard way of promoting yourself when you're not doing a very good job in the first place. Hey, what do you think of the great work we're not doing? So I think there was no one to really champion that too, because A, Mike Higgins was high all the time. B, I was brand new. C, Jim was just sort of like this ogre that no one wanted to work with. So it wasn't like a real like, hey, let's hype this. It was sort of like, let's just get it out, get it moving.
So they say a lot of we've seen a lot that there was no budget for the new universe. Like the initial thing was like, oh, you'll have all this extra money. So was that just like promotional budget? Because I mean, when you're working on the books, you're still getting like a page rate, like a
yeah. There's definitely a seed money to get things started. So, for example, they say like, oh, you have $50,000 to start these off, do promotions work, get pages drawn, and do prototypes and whatnot. But maybe the executives, that's where I was not involved in that. That was the Elliot Brown, Jack Morelli part of it.
Oh, okay.
And from what I saw, what was produced was sort of like, this is it. Like, this is not a lot to work with, because they transferred those pages in these flat file drawers to us. That's sort of like starting from scratch. There's a lot of like, there was like a Brett Blevins Night Mask cover. There was a Tony Salmons Night Mask. There was maybe another Star Brand drawing, maybe a few Justice drawings. It wasn't like there were 6 treatments there. It wasn't like you paid a bunch of writers to give their best proposals. So I think there's a little bit of a fairy tales involved there with like, well, they cut the budget, so that's the reason. This is why this got off to such a bumpy start. It got up to a bumpy start because it just wasn't very good, and it was late, and you had a lot of turmoil behind the scenes where you fire the first team of editors doing this, and then you put it onto, Laurel and Hardy, me and Mike Higgins, like we're as green as grass when it comes to that. And like, okay, like if you had given this titles to Roy Thomas or Steve Englehart to write and edit, you probably would have had a much different outcome, because there was a lot more credibility with that. And I'm not disparaging my own marvelous reputation as the legend. I'm just saying that, no one knew who I was. So it was like, hey, I can't wait to work with Mike and Mike. Like, who are you? So it wasn't like we could even hype ourselves. So like, hi, we're the New Universe people. You want to work here? You want to work with us? And as a result, it wasn't like, well, you only got $10,000 to do this. No one ever came into the office and said that there wasn't an interoffice email or interoffice memo. Sorry, I digress. That said, this is your budget. We would get people to turn in their invoices, they'd do their work, and we just sent it out. It wasn't like we were in control of the budgets. But probably that seed money to kickstart it all, they probably said, yeah, for what you're spending, this is it. You're probably spending more on company dinners and lunches, on your expense accounts than you're actually doing any work. So yeah, that was probably one of the main reasons.
Yeah, I know when you put them out, like you say, you got 3 or 4 months of sales before you even start, or you've got to have made 3 or 4 months of books before you even start getting sales back. So that's an investment right there, I guess.
Yeah, and you have to have like 6 issues ready to launch a title. And if you can't launch the title without 6 issues in the drawer, I keep referencing that, you're doomed, because you have to have them ready so that they're out there timely. You could promote. Like, how do you promote something where you don't have anything? How can you promote the 3rd issue of Night Mask when you don't even have the 1st issue drawn?
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the things in our, like when we end our podcast, we're like, hey, what's coming next? And so we'll instead of looking at the actual comic, we'll read what, like, the promotionals said. And for those first couple months, like the story that's like, hey, check out Night Mask number 5 and this happens, and we're like, no, that doesn't actually happen. Like, because it's just hard to stay ahead because all those fill-ins and such, I imagine. So
we didn't have a clue. We might have known that was going to happen, but it didn't.
But sometimes, though, most of the time those stories would come back around. Does that kind of work on the tail end of things too, though? Probably. So if something's going away, right, but you've still got like a couple months worth of books kind of through the pipeline. Yeah,
just get them out, because you're basically going to burn them. Like it's just wasted money. So if it's in the drawer, print it. I don't know if there's any full issues of any of these titles just sitting there unused. It was just like, write them, draw them, print them, done. Maybe near the end of Justice and all that. I wasn't on those, but No, it was just like get them done. And there was not a lot of consistency, as you said. Like issue 5 hype for this, it may not have appeared till issue 8 because you know, with Archie and others, it just is so unpredictable, and it's embarrassing too. But what people don't know is like those catalogs or any of that hype that was written is written 2 or 3 months in advance.
Yeah,
you have all the best of intentions of delivering that. And that's why I said it's good to have 6 issues. It's great to have 6 issues in the drawer, but if you can't promote issue 4 at the time when it needs to be promoted, you're basically going to leave no picture in that little block of copy on a big manual of things to order from. It's kind of like shopping from a catalog, and there's no picture of the shoes you want. You just sort of look to say, oh, I think I like those shoes, but I don't know what they look like. You're going to go to the picture of the shoes that you want, so you like. It's a no-brainer. Well, the description is weak. 32 pages of action. Okay. Next.
At least I got the page count right.
Yeah, the world outside your window. Yeah. Okay. I don't think I'm going to buy this one either. Like Spider-Man versus the Rhino in the streets of Times Square. Okay, that's intriguing. I may not even need a visual because I already know that Spider-Man's established. I know the Rhino's established. I know they're going to have a big fight in the middle of Times Square. Cool. Who's writing it? Who's drawing it? I'm going to pre-order that. That's going to sell out. Not like Nightmare 6. Does anyone remember who wrote Nightmare 6?
I mean, we probably do, but
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, that's awesome. Oh man. I'm looking at my list of questions and I feel like we covered everything.
Great.
Which is awesome.
Let's wrap it up then.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks so much for being with us.
Hey, well, I think it's great what you're doing. And when I saw that listing, I was like, why don't you get me on? Because why not? I mean, I work there. It's certainly not to take you off the course of what you're doing, because whatever you're doing is cool. The fans of this, people are passionate. You're both grown men with families still talking about the new universe. So shout out to you, and that's the awesome part of it. Like when I talk about my Marvel career, I don't list the new universe titles as the first thing I talk about. Let me tell you that. I say from humble beginnings, I went on to edit Captain America, Thor, the Fantastic Four, Doctor Strange, Quasar, you name it, Savage Sword of Conan. That's my legacy. But you have to start somewhere. And the new universe is right where I started from at the beginning, which I'm looking back, I'm really proud of, because when I saw the Facebook page, I was like, this is awesome. I was there from the beginning. So, thanks for taking me seriously too. You don't know me. I could be an unhinged lunatic, and you may still think that, and that's fine. It's well within your rights. But
for the record, I don't. But
the moral of the story here is that it's just great that we're talking about comics that were made over 30 years ago, almost 35 years ago, and still enjoying them and mocking them and appreciating how they were made. So I think that's what I wanted to bring to the table, is that as difficult as they were, I certainly have an appreciation for them, and holding back issues in my hand is like, wow, I actually helped make this, and you can't change that. So that's what I'm really excited about, and the fact that you folks appreciate it, and people who tune into this, and shout out to them because they're fans of this. Wow, imagine that. There's still people out there who haven't forgotten. So it's nice not to be forgotten. So thank you.
Yeah, awesome. I would add more, but I think that's like a perfect ending sounding piece.
I appreciate it, gentlemen.
You've summarized our work completely. Thank you.
Oh, no, I appreciate it. This has been a blast for me, and hopefully for you too. And enjoy the editing process, and hopefully there's some coherence to this, and share out a link when you get a chance.
I will have to learn how to bleep out swear words.
Yeah, I'm sorry I went over there, but with Jim Shooter, it's really hard not to. Yeah, bleep them out. It'll give you something to work on.